So in the previous video, we talked about how to conduct a survey, such as we want to know what is the average cost at first year on the textbook. So we need to find the sample, and we talked about, hey, you can just sample in the math department because we pay 0 on our textbook expense. So in this video, we're going to talk about what would be the good, appropriate sampling method. So sampling bias. So what is sampling bias? So a sampling method is based if every member of the population doesn't have equal likelihood of being in the sample. So think about it. There is one goal we need to keep in mind. We would like the sample to be representative of the population. So you don't want any bias. So one way to ensure the sample has a reasonable chance of mirroring the population is to employ randomness. The most basic random method is simple random sampling. So that means you get students from here and there, just everywhere on the road. So you don't just go to the math building to find some student to survey them, or go to the music department to survey them. So a random sample is where each member of the population has an equal probability of being chosen. A simple random sample is where every member of the population and any group of the member has an equal probability of being chosen. So it should be every member of the population of any group. So that means when you're trying to find out what is the best to survey, is you get students from each department, from each major, like math department, music department, every department that they provide in SPSCC. So here's an example. If we could somehow identify all likely voter in the state, put each of others' name on a piece of paper and toss the slip into a very large hat and draw 1,000 slip out of the hat, we would have a simple random sample. Okay, so now however, that even a random sample might end up to not be totally representative of the population if we repeatedly take samples of 1,000 people from among the population of the likely voter in the state of Washington. Some of these samples might tend to have slightly higher percentage of Democrats or Republican than does in the general population. Some sample might including more older people, and some sample might including more younger people. In most of cases, this sampling viability is not significant. So what is a sampling viability? So the natural variation of a sample is called sampling variability. This is unavoidable and expected in a random sampling, and in most cases it's not an issue. So we don't need to worry about that. Okay, to help account for the variability, pollster might instead use a stratified sample. So what is stratified sample? In a stratified sample is a population divided into a number of subgroup strata, and random sample are then taken from each subgroup with the sample size proportionalized to the size of the subpopulation. So look, suppose in a particular state that previous data indicated that electorate was comprised of 39% of Democrat and 37% of a Republican and 24% independent. In a sample of 1,000 people, they would then expect to get about 319 Democrats, 370 Republican, and 214 independent. to accomplish this, they would randomly select 319 people from the amount those voters known to be Democrat and 317 from those known to be a Republican and 214 from those with no party affiliation. So this is called stratified sampling. I can use the same example that we had for SPSCC. For example, we still want to know the average cost on the textbook at your first year. Then we know that, hey, there is 1,000 students in the math department and 400 students in the music department, and this is just random, and the 500 students from the biology department, and maybe another 600 from the social study. So to stratify the sampling is you want to proportionalize the sample size. So what would you do? Maybe I can just get 10% people from the math department, which is 100, to survey, and then 10% from the music department, which is 14 students, and the 50 students from the bio department to survey, and 60 students from the social studies department to survey them about the cost on their textbook. Okay, so stratified sampling can be also used to select the sample with people in a desired age or specific mixed ratio of male and female. A variation on this technique is called quota sampling. So quota sampling is a variation on a stratified sampling, wherein samples are connected in each subgroup until the desired quota is met. So suppose the posters calls people at random, but once they had met their quota of 319 Democrats, they only gather people who do not identify themselves as Democrats. Okay. So the next sampling method called cluster sample. In the cluster sampling, the population is divided into subgroup called cluster, and the set of subgroups are selected to be in the sample. For example, if the college wanted to survey students, since the students are already divided into classes, they could just randomly select 10 classes and give the survey to all the students just in those classes. The classes are the clustered, and we can randomly select the clusters to the survey. So let's use the same example that we have, such as the math. Let's say SPSCC only have 4 departments: math department, music department, social study department, and the biology department. And cluster means you only pick maybe just 2 classes, which is the student from the math classes and student from the social study classes, and you survey every student from this group. So this is called the cluster sampling. That means you need to sampling 1,000 students. How much student in the social study? 600. And then you sample 600 students as social study. You don't sample everyone else in the music department and biology major student. Okay, so you see the differences between the stratified and the cluster sampling. Stratified is you pick some percentage from each department, but this one is after you divide it into group, you just survey the whole group. Okay, the next one is systematic sampling. In a systematic sampling, every nth number of the population is selected to be sampled. So for example, to select a sample using a systematic sampling, a pollster calls every 100th name in the phone book. The system sampling is not as random as a simple random sampling. If your name is Albert, Arthur, like start with A, and your sister is Alice, starting with A, is right after you in the phone book, there's no way you could both end up in the sample. but it can yield acceptable samples. Okay, the other one is convenient sampling and the voluntary response sampling. These two are the biased sampling method. So convenient sampling is the sample chosen by selecting whoever is convenient. Usually they're biased. And the voluntary response sampling is allow the sample to volunteer. So, for example, a pollster stands on the street corner and interview the first 100 people who agrees to speak to him. This is a convenient sample. Because if you think about it, people willing to speak to them, maybe they will have a stronger political views than the other people who they are not speaking to them. And then the other one is what is voluntary response sampling. A website has a survey asking readers to give their opinion to the text proposal. This is a self-selected sample or voluntary response sample in which respondents volunteer to participate. So usually volunteer response sample are skewed towards people who have a particular strong opinion about the subject of the survey, or who just have way too much time on their hands and enjoy taking survey. So now this is another example. Try to pause the video and fill in that and see which sampling method was used. A, fourth person in the class was selected. So if you're doing the nth person, this should be what? Systematic sampling. Second, viewers of a new show are asked to vote on the show website. So this was what? Viewers of the new show are asked to vote to the show website. This should be what? Convenience sample. Oh, I'm sorry. This should be systematic. I write it wrong. B, a sample was selected to contain 25 men and 35 women. I think this should classify as what? Quoted sampling. Because once you met 25 men, then you stop survey any men. You starting survey, just survey the women. Okay, a website randomly select 50 of their customers to send a satisfaction survey to. So what would be that? This should be a simple sample. Okay. To survey voter in the town, a polling company randomly select 10 city blocks and interview everyone who lives in those blocks. So they interview everyone who lives in those blocks. So this is not stratified. This should be cluster sampling. Okay, that's it for today. If you have any other questions, let me know.